to the Patriots yesterday. The Broncos have now lost 3 of their last 4 games and are 9th in the AFC standings, 3rd in the AFC West. So the defending champs are in serious danger of missing the playoffs. Max Kellerman, what has happened to these Broncos?
All right, what has happened? Bad luck, basically. I mean, but let's be specific about how it's bad luck. Look, they've been to 2 of the last 3 Super Bowls. So the franchise remains in excellent shape. But sometimes in order to preserve the excellence of the franchise, you have to make decisions that are not in your best short-term or immediate interest. They let go of Malik Jackson's gone and Trevathan, and so their defense got a little thinner and a little bit worse, just a little bit worse from like kind of an all-time dominant position they were in last year. They got banged up in the secondary. They bring back C.J. Anderson. He gets hurt. So all these little things contribute to a team. Oh, and by the way, they were so bad at the quarterback position last year that Peyton Manning played in the playoffs, as bad as he was. And the reason he played is because that's how bad Osweiler was. And yet still they felt Osweiler was their best option, a guy who just got benched for the Texans to come back in the game, and offered him like $16 million a year. He got more elsewhere. So their number 1 option, who was terrible, Peyton Manning last year's gone. Their number 2 option, they couldn't even retain. So they go with their number 3 option, and Elway took a calculated risk here. Maybe we're good enough to get back to the playoffs anyway while we preserve our cap going forward, because we have the nucleus of a dynastic team if we get this right. And all that said, they're going to just miss the playoffs this year. So it's like, what happened to them? The NFL happened to them. This is how it goes.
They're not the same type of football team that we've seen. They were defensive heavy last year, and they've had a lot of injuries on the D-line. Wolf has been hurt and banged out in and out every now and then. You look at their secondary, you mentioned it. They're not the same fly zone secondary. But the offensive line is not good. Let's not, we've glossed over it because we talked about Peyton and the run game. The reason the run game is not the same because, first of all, they have running backs by committee.
It was even inconsistent last year with Peyton, though. It wasn't until like down the stretch they got it
I'm glad you brought that up because, you know, we can talk about Gary Kubiak and his offense. His offense is pretty much what made Mike Shanahan very successful in Denver. Being able to run the football with TD and Clint Portis and all these other guys that have been there. But the offensive line has to do their job, and they're not the same. They're not able to pick up blitzes. They're not able to open up holes for running backs that have come off the street because 7 guys have run the football for the Denver Broncos. Now you're asking Trevor Siemian, a guy who's never started, a guy who, you know, came from Northwestern. All you heard about him was how smart he was and him just has strong arm. But the thing about it is they haven't fallen that far from what we've seen. Yeah, they're not going to make the playoffs. Now, what does this mean now going forward? Is Trevor Siemian going to be your guy? Free agency, are you going to go out and get defensive linemen, offensive linemen? You need a splash player. We've seen them, you know, Demaryius Thomas. We've seen Emmanuel Sanders. Are you going to go get that tight end like you had with Julius, with their tight ends that they've had? Jacob Tamme, all these guys that have been very successful with Peyton Manning. But you need somebody to come with maybe Paxton Lynch. Eventually, we need to see what Paxton Lynch can do, and will he be your guy?
I believe in John Elway. I think he obviously is a 2-time Super Bowl champion as a quarterback. He's a Super Bowl champion as an executive. He deserves a lot of credit. But we can't completely absolve him from blame here. Because here's the reality. That offensive line, that is a question mark. That's got something to do with him. The losses on defense with Trevathan and Malik Jackson and those boys, that's got something to do with him. Your inability to defend against the run, your inability to struggle, or your struggles against tight ends, that's got something to do with him. And dare I say, you did push Peyton Manning out the door. Now, we understand Peyton Manning was done.
Yeah, he's done.
9 touchdowns, 17 interceptions, QBR 44. He looked absolutely awful. But we also have to take into consideration, and you would know this, Donovan, when you talk about a quarterback, you're talking about cerebrally as well. You're talking about intellectuals. I'm sure you can appreciate that, Max. It's not just about your performance.
I can appreciate it too. Yeah, thanks.
I call him Spot Kellerman. That's why, because his logic defies all. That's what I'm trying to say.
I thought it had something to do with my ears.
That's what I'm saying. That's the whole deal.
Ivy Leaguer at the
But my point is this. When you look at Peyton Manning, let's take this into consideration. He controlled both lines of scrimmage. You know what that's about. When you go up to the line of scrimmage, you can dictate what a defense does. You can dictate what an offense does because you outthink everybody else. And you know how to hurt people even when you have an inability physically to do the kind of things you were once capable of doing. And then you go from that to Trevor Siemian. That's a problem.
He's supposed to be smart, too.
Yeah, well, I'm not saying that he's not. I'm just saying inexperienced. But before that, you pushed him, you nudged him out because you thought you would retain Brock Osweiler. And maybe, just maybe, that was where you miscalculated, because it's not just the offer you made him. You thought that would be enough to keep him, and you might have miscalculated. And in that regard, we got to hold Elway
They
accountable.
did miscalculate.
Let me
Worse off
add
with
to
them.
that also. You got to remember, too, the offense that they were running wasn't Gary Kubiak's offense. It was Peyton Manning's offense.
Yeah. So, well, they tried it early in the season, and he wasn't down with that.
And that's my point. So you're talking about this is Peyton Manning's offense. Although Peyton Manning is no longer there, now you're going to the Gary Kubiak offense.
But he just wants to run the football.
Yeah, well, he wants to run. In order for you to run the football, you
gotta
can't
have a
run the
running back.
football. Yeah, you got to have a running back.
CJ's gone.
And CJ was hurt, and everybody else that they decided to bring in now is your guy. But if you're not blocking up front in that advanced blocking scheme, you're not going to open up holes for guys to be very successful. But in doing that, if you're running the football, it's more about the attempts in that offense. So now the bootleg is very big for any quarterback. We haven't seen Trevor Siemian get outside the pocket. He stays inside the pocket and throwing it to Demaryius Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders. And it hasn't been consistent enough for them to be on a level with the Kansas City Chiefs or more with the Oakland Raiders and how successful they are in the passing game. Now, defensively, we just can't gloss over the fact that people are going after Harris and also Talib. And people are going down the middle of the football field and challenging T.J. Ward to guard someone at the tight end or in the slot position. Their linebackers aren't the same. Trevathan's gone. He was their vocal leader, and he's no longer there. He's in Chicago. So it's not just so much of the offense in Gary Kubiak, but I'm going to put it all on him, to me, because your offense, you have to understand the talent that you have, and you have to cater it to the talent that you have, and not just say, this is my offense has been successful. No, you have to cater to the Trevor Siemians. You have to cater it to whatever running back is back there. If they can catch the ball, make them catch the ball and run screens. If they can run the ball, then pound it up the middle.
All your guys' criticisms are legitimate. I'm not questioning the legitimacy of the criticism. I'm just saying there is one Patriots. There's one Bill Belichick. You want to say Patriots light? That's Seattle with Pete Carroll. You know, Belichick and Brady, Carroll and Wilson. Every other team in the league either has to make the calculation that, all right, this season we're not going to put all our chips in the middle of the table. Like, we may not win the Super Bowl this season. We're going to try to compete because we're building, we want to preserve our cap space and all these things going forward. Or they do push it all to the middle of the table and they go, all right, this is our window. Let's go now, because once that closes, we're going to have to rebuild. Only the Patriots and the Seahawks are franchises where year in and year out they are going to be in the playoffs. And you know what? No matter how they've reshuffled things, they have a shot to win the Super Bowl. So by that standard, that's not the Broncos yet, and probably because they've never found their young franchise QB.
That's the main
probably
thing.
Been the difference.
In order for you to win in this league, you got to have a coach and a quarterback combination that has experience and understand what it takes to win.
We're not saying the obvious, though.
Right.
That is that Gary Kubiak, Super Bowl champion Gary Kubiak, may have, back up
to John Elway.
No. Dare I say, may have gotten entirely too much credit for that title. When we think about that defense, it is what it is because of the personnel. That's Elway. When we think about the offense, it wasn't his. It was Peyton Manning's offense. So now, instead of looking at Gary Kubiak, the Super Bowl champion, maybe we need to refresh our memory of what we thought about him before he arrived in Denver. That means he was a coach of the Houston Texans when he had Matt Shaw. But
Another
don't get me
good
started with
segue
him.
for me, Stephen A.
There you go.
Thank you.